Hi, and welcome to the Great Women in Compliance podcast, sponsored by Corporate Compliance Insights, hosted by Hema Lomax and me, Lisa Fine. For this roundtable episode, I'm so excited that Ellen Hunt is with us and leading us in this fabulous conversation, because today we're digging into how civility, or its absence, affects voice and belonging, especially in challenging moments. And joining the roundtable are two incredible individuals. I'm so excited they're here as well. The first is Jelahn Stewart. She's the Senior Vice President, Deputy General Counsel, and Chief Compliance Officer at Leidos, where she oversees global compliance and ethics program. Jelahn's path has taken her through the Department of Justice and Walmart, and she knows firsthand what it takes to shape ethical cultures across both public and private sectors. One of the things that Ellen and I both admire the most about Jelahn is that she doesn't think of compliance as rules. She sees it as building trust and creating spaces where people can actually do their best work. Jelahn, welcome. And we also have Katharine Manning. She's the author of The Empathetic Workplace, 5 Steps to a Compassionate, Calm, and Confident Response to Trauma on the Job. And she is also the president of Blackbird, DC. She has worked on issues of trauma and victimization for over 25 years. She's as a senior attorney advisor with the Executive Office for the United States Attorneys. It's a mouthful. For 15 years, she guided the Justice Department through its response to victims in cases ranging from terrorism to large-scale financial fraud to child exploitation. Some of the cases that she's advised on include the Boston Marathon bombing, the Pulse nightclub, and South Carolina AME church shootings, uprising in Charlottesville, Madoff investment fraud, and the federal case against Larry Nassar, the doctor for the U.S. Women's Olympic Gymnastics team. Katharine also previously joined Hema almost a year ago to the day of this release to discuss trauma-informed leadership and empathy-driven leadership. And that's something we could all use a little more of these days. That's episode 244, if anyone's wondering. We are really honored to have both of you here with us today. Thank you, Katharine.
Thank you.
And with that, let's get started. The page is stuck. You'll have to get rid of this pause because for some reason I'm having trouble on the computer. To start, let's do this. Can you each share a moment from your career where civility or the lack of it profoundly altered the tone and ethical decision-making process of your workspace? Katharine, let's start with you and then go on to Jelahn.
Lisa, thank you so much for that question. I have to say it is a really timely one for me because this is an issue that I am really grappling with in this moment. This week, I read a really compelling and disturbing article by a colleague named Lori Rudiman. She is an author and public speaker. She's a really amazing, brave woman. She comes from the HR space. She has a podcast as well, another wonderful podcast called Punk Rock HR. And she has been doing a lot of public speaking for decades. But she wrote a really vulnerable and open article talking about the harassment that she has been experiencing for many years, where she has received emails and text messages and voice messages from men, from strangers, for many years, really graphic, abusive, threatening messages, some of which make clear that they know where she lives and are scary, they're frightening. And I realized in reading her article that I come from a space, as you mentioned in the intro, in my bio, I've worked on issues of trauma and victimization really my entire adult life, since college. I am very aware of the issues that women in the public eye face. And in reading her post, it just made clear to me how much self-censorship I have been engaged in because of my fear of that type of abuse. And it's something that I'm personally grappling with right now. It's something that I think a lot of people are facing. And I know that this is about civility. And I think one of the things we need to think about is what is that line between civility and abuse? Certainly what Lori is detailing in her article, it definitely goes into the line of abuse, but there's a lot that I've experienced that probably is more in the line of civility, but is equally silencing for me because I can see how it could very quickly fall into abuse. And I think it's important for all of us to understand that implicit threat is there, even in some of the comments that on their face might not seem that difficult or might seem like, oh, that's not a big deal. Why is she so upset about that? And so I think it's helpful and wise for you all to be having this conversation. And I think all workplaces should be thinking through what are the behaviors that we are allowing to slide because maybe we don't think it's such a big deal, because those smaller comments that we are allowing to slide might be just the first level of a lot more abusive behavior that's going on. What do you think about that, Jelahn? I know that you, in your role, are grappling with a lot that's happening company-wide. You're seeing a lot more nationally and internationally.
Absolutely. I guess in the last 6 months, we've certainly seen an increase in, I would say, uncivil behaviors. And it's interesting you mentioned it's hard to define what is that line between abuse and incivility. What we do here at my company is we actually have categories. We keep track, we keep metrics on everything. And sometimes it can be a challenge to define it, but we do have two big categories. So we have harassment or sexual harassment, and then we have non-sexual harassment and other types of behaviors. And we do, as I mentioned, we do keep track of it. And I would say over the last 6 months, we've certainly seen an increase. I've actually spoken with a lot of my peers at other companies, and they too have seen increases. And so we've gotten together to try and figure out how to address this issue. And I will just say, I've been working a very long time, and I've seen the behaviors change over the years. I do believe things are getting a lot better. When I started working decades ago now, I remember I was working in a firm, and the firm had a new partner join, and it was a female partner. And she was a yeller and a screamer and would even throw the pen. And so you think about, she'd be mad, she'd slam the pen down, and she might even throw it across the room. And you just described, what's that line? And now, is someone throwing a pen at me? I'm a former prosecutor, and that's an assault. Certainly that can be an assault. But when that partner came in, she drastically changed the culture of the entire firm. And it really silenced everyone. And in fact, no one spoke up even when things were going wrong because everyone was afraid to say things to her. They were afraid that she would become, like you just said, abusive. And what happened was it had a drastic impact on the culture. People started quitting. I ended up quitting. I remember one person was taken out they had to call an ambulance. They took someone up because the person was having heart palpitations. But that's how bad incivility can get. Now, like I said, that was decades ago. I've not seen that kind of behavior in my career since then, but certainly incivility can have a significant impact on the culture. And I too am really glad to be having this discussion.
So let's dig in a little bit more about defining what civility means, because I think we got to get our heads around it to properly identify it and manage it. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of a book that was published many years ago called The No Asshole Rule. And I don't know if that's the right line or not, but the point being that you demonstrated in your story is one person who acts in a way that is not okay with the group can change the whole culture of the group. And that context becomes silencing. So when we think about it, how do we define it in the workplace? I mean, you mentioned, Jelahn, that you have metrics. So you help us think about, from your vantage point, how do you identify it? How do you get metrics on it? But the other side of the coin is then what behaviors elevate those interactions so that they are civil and even enhance ethical decision making?
So we do have a code of conduct that really does set forth our expectations for employees. And obviously no harassing comments, racially harassing comments, sexually harassing comments. And we have no comments based on protected classes. And we have a whole host of categories that we prevent those harassing comments. But what's more difficult to define are those behaviors that are not based on any protected class, but are equally offensive or just rude comments. And so we do have a category where we do keep track of those rude comments, and we absolutely take action on them. Interestingly, my CEO, I actually shared some of the metrics with our CEO is my role in the chief compliance officer, and we saw a significant increase over the last 6 months. And he was very disturbed to see the increase. And he made it very clear that we will be civil in our organization. He actually has a word cloud with important phrases that he likes to share with employees. And right in the center is be civil. And so he directed us to go out and to do training. And we actually did. And first of all, we said, we are here because the CEO wants us to be here. And that's not tone at the top. I don't know what is. But when we let people know that was what his expectation was, it made all the difference. We also defined the behavior. We gave examples of uncivil behavior so that people could understand very clearly what the expectations were. And lo and behold, the next quarter, those numbers of uncivil behavior took a significant dive. We went back to normal levels, but I think it was just setting those expectations and letting people know what the behavior we want to see when you come to the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we started talking about this, we had a little discussion about kind of everybody's line could be a little bit different, and also thinking a little bit about bystanders. But Katharine, I want to pick up with you kind of on the slippery slope and when we normalize behavior that makes everybody uncomfortable because we stay silent, the kind of go along, get along, right? Let's be nice. It's harmony. Don't rock the boat. Don't be difficult to work with, that kind of stuff. Where do you think that kind of resistance to speaking up and that slippery slope, what have you seen? Does that become the beginning of the downfall in the kind of cases you've worked with? Or what are your thoughts on how do you kind of set the line for people on what civility is?
Civility doesn't mean we don't have hard conversations. Like, we have to be willing and able to have difficult conversations. In my trainings on empathetic leadership, one of the things I talk about is talking about the elephant in the room. And I'll never forget once I started talking about this topic, and there was a guy with a group of managers, and a guy in the back of the room raised his hand and he said, "I'm sorry, as a manager, isn't it my job to avoid talking about the elephant in the room at all costs? Like, why on earth would I want to bring up the really uncomfortable topics?" And I said, "No, I get that, but here's the thing. Like, when you don't talk about the giant elephant in the room, like, it starts to smell eventually, right? Like, it doesn't go away. And we're not just bringing up controversial topics for the heck of it, right? We're bringing them up because we know that they're on people's minds, they're affecting their ability to show up authentically at work. And if we don't talk about them, what we are communicating implicitly is we can't talk about hard things here. So we have to be willing to address the hard thing, sometimes even the hard thing that we don't have a good answer for. So there's a huge downturn in the economy and there might be layoffs. Like, we don't really know what's going to happen. Or there's like violence, global violence happening in the world, and it's affecting people who have loved ones in another part of the world, something like that. Like, these are difficult things. Maybe we don't have a good answer for them, but if we're not even willing to talk about them, what are we communicating to people? So we have to be willing to at least acknowledge these challenges. And I think we are doing ourselves a disservice if we think we can't have these kinds of conversations in a civil way. It means we need to approach them with a little bit of thought and planning in a deliberate way. I taught a class at Dominican University on trauma-informed leadership, and we happened to be having class the day after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And my class was all women, and it's a Catholic university. And I thought, oh boy, I wonder how this is going to go. But I also thought I can't not address it. And so I said, we're going to take a little time here at the beginning of class, just in case anybody would like to share their thoughts on this. So we talked about ground rules, some of which included keep your comments to no more than a couple of minutes, speak from the I perspective, don't make assumptions about what other people think or what their values are, share your own thoughts. We had an incredibly open, valuable, transparent conversation. It was really lovely, and we came away, I think, more bonded and connected to each other because of it. It didn't mean everybody had the same views. So these conversations can be really cathartic and lovely and build psychological safety, even in the midst of differing views. So I don't think we should sell ourselves short. I think we can have these kinds of civil conversations, even on difficult topics.
And let's even go back one step further. And from my personal view, I have a little trouble asking this question. And Jelahn, when you were talking earlier about pens being thrown by lawyers, we had staplers. And I was just thinking, as a completely different aside, I wonder, these people are no longer in the workforce, but when there was less paper, were they going to move to pens or something else as opposed to improving behaviors? But with that in mind, why does civility matter for the performance, creativity, team health, and in fostering a good environment? Similar to what Katharine was just talking about, concerns being raised early on. And I guess, Katharine, how, from your experience leading teams through trauma, how does civility enable psychological safety and resilience?
Okay.
Katharine?
Oh, was that Katharine? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I thought it was you, Jelahn. Sorry. Who are you directing that to, Lisa?
You,
Sorry.
because it's from your experience leading.
Oh, me?
I'll restart it right here.
Okay.
Okay. Katharine, from your experience leading teams through trauma, how does civility enable psychological safety and resilience?
I think it's essential if you want people to feel comfortable talking about what it is that they're actually experiencing. You have to create the kind of environment where they know that when they are sharing authentically what it is that they're going through, they're going to be met with a compassionate response. If they're afraid that if they're honest about what it is that they're experiencing, whether it's, I have a different view from you on Roe v. Wade, or it's, I'm really worried about a family member who's living in Israel or Palestine, or my coworker just threw a pen at me. If they're worried that their response that they are met with is not going to be a compassionate one, is instead going to be shutting them down or making fun of them or dismissive, you're definitely not going to get the full story from them. And you are not creating the kind of environment where the next time something happens to them or to anybody else they know in the workplace, you're going to hear about it. This is the thing, like I always think about, there was a guy that I worked with at the Justice Department who, he was working crimes in Indian country, and when he came into the district, his boss said to him, oh, you're going to get like a few DUIs, maybe a simple assault, maybe like every 7 years you might get like a sexual assault or a homicide case, but it's a really quiet district. He happened to, in the first month, an agent came to him and said, I've got this cold case sexual assault case. Would you be willing to take a look? And he did. And he spent a lot of time on it. He met with the victim. He did just a thorough investigation, not like over the top, just a real investigation. And ultimately, he determined he was not going to be able to reopen, but he explained that to the victim. He said, here's why, but if you ever have any additional information comes to light, please come back to me. I'd be happy to take another look. To me, just seems like a reasonable way of handling the case, but he dealt with it thoroughly. He was respectful. He was compassionate in his review. That year, he had 7 sexual assault cases. They were coming out of the woodwork because he was compassionate. He was willing to listen. This is what happens. It's not that these incidents aren't happening, right? It's that people aren't willing to come forward because they don't believe anybody's listening to them. So if you have that kind of civil response, a compassionate, empathetic response, you're going to learn about a lot more issues more quickly so that you can deal with them. And isn't that your goal ultimately when you're dealing with ethics and compliance?
Okay, the same thing is true in the workplace. There are times where in meetings, there are managers who will shut someone down. They will say, "Oh, that's a stupid idea," or something like that. Do you think that employee is ever going to speak up again with an idea? And the danger in that is they'll have a good idea down the line, but you'll never know. You're never going to know about it because they're not going to speak up because of the way you handled it the first time. And to your point of you have to have difficult conversations sometimes, right? If someone is in a meeting and they raise an idea that's like off base, it's not a good idea. If you say it's a stupid idea, or even worse, you're a stupid person for raising that idea, you're going to shut that person down. But maybe you need to convey that it's not the best idea, right? We still have to be transparent with people, but it's the way you approach it that makes all the difference. Maybe you say, well, now that's an interesting concept. I'm not sure it exactly fits what we're doing here. Maybe that would be workable in a different context. And do you have anything that fits these parameters? And that doesn't humiliate the employee in front of others. And perhaps when they have a better fitting idea in the future, they'll speak up. But it's just like you said, it's all in the approach. If you reward people for speaking up, then they will continue to speak up. If you shut them down, then you silence them. And maybe others in the meeting who also have good ideas, but they saw the way you treated that person and they're not going to speak up as well.
Yeah, I want to pull a little bit more on this thread about how these kind of actions impact women, because there's a recent Harvard Business Review article on incivility at the workplace silences everyone, but especially women. And I thought it was interesting because it really kind of talks about how gender expectations may be a greater indicator of silence than psychological safety, right? So I may have the great boss that pulls out the ideas, is open to them, and maybe acknowledges it's not the right idea for this project or problem, but it's still an idea worth thinking about. But if I feel that women are perceived as not being allowed to speak up, shouldn't speak up, that's not their role, I just may not. And Jelahn, do you think that resonates and makes sense in the environment you're in? Does it seem like it's something that's real, or you think the research, maybe they missed the mark?
The research missed the mark. I can absolutely understand why women would feel would be silenced more. There are a couple of reasons I can think of why that would occur. I personally have not seen that, and it's probably the environments that I've been in where I haven't seen women be silenced more. And in fact, the public relations firm that I worked for, what I described earlier, it was a woman who was doing the silencing, and she was silencing everyone. But from a woman's perspective, you have to take a person as you find them, right? And you never know what experiences they may have. And for women in particular, if there is a man who is doing that uncivil behavior, they're throwing pins and yelling and screaming, sometimes there might be a physical difference that might trigger something in the woman to say, you know what? I don't have psychological unsafety. I have physical. I fear for my safety. So let me just pipe this down and and that's a way that they can be silenced just because they have a fear of physical safety. And if a man is doing that, engaging in that uncivil behavior, they may not have any intention at all to engage in any kind of physical harm, but the perception of someone who is smaller, it makes all the difference. They may fear that their safety, even though there's no intention on the part of the individual who is engaging in that conduct. The other thing that I think of is for women, especially over the last several months, there have been a lot of women in the workforce who have lost their positions. And it is very difficult for women you don't see a lot of women at higher levels, at executive levels. And so when you're in a meeting and there's some incivility going on and you think that you're speaking up may challenge that, you might want to think, a woman might think twice because if I lose this job, if worst case scenario, I speak up, I'm terminated. If I lose this job, I might not get another one. So maybe I'm not going to be as inclined to speak up. That's another way that I think women are more likely to be silenced in these situations.
And Katharine, in your experience, do you think that the gender expectations play a role in how civil our workplaces are or are not?
I think the research is pretty clear on it for sure. I've seen it in most compelling context in law enforcement. There's some pretty astonishing research coming out in terms of percentages of women in police departments and how it's played out in terms of civility and numbers of complaints and officer involved shootings, and it's pretty amazing. So there's actually an initiative now, I think it's 30 by 30, trying to get 30% female departments by 2030 coming out of that research. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then the other thing I found interesting in the article that you cited was that it was sort of a pushback a little bit on the idea that the issue is we need women to be more confident, because it was saying it's not necessarily just women should be stronger or more confident. It's more about the environment that they're in. I find that really interesting.
And I also wanted to just mention something about that. I wonder sometimes the reverse is true. If you are the woman who speaks up or is candid, do you then get, partially because of gender, being identified as the woman who complains? And being in those rooms, and it sometimes I think you look at it like or anyone is it what is the right thing to do, what is the best thing to do, and how do I do the right thing in what might be a no-win situation. I think as we become more senior, it becomes even more important that we're willing to use our voices in those ways, because sometimes when you do, I'm always impressed about the number of people who come and say something later, and it may make them feel more empowered. But I do wonder about the other side too. But with that, I think that brings us to my next question, which is we're always looking in ethics and compliance for practical and constructive ways to improve organizational cultures. And what do you think? What specific steps do you suggest that we take to cultivate and increase civility? And Katharine, I'll start with you with small daily practices. What ideas do you have for that can help us?
I think for me, one of the things that I think is really important is being mindful of my own energy levels. It's often about boundary setting for myself. One of the things I know about myself is my energy really dips in the late afternoon. And so I have learned it is probably better for me. Like, I'm more likely to send an email at 6 a.m. than 6 p.m. Because if I send that email at 6 p.m., it doesn't matter. It can be like, no big deal. I'm not mad at anybody. I sound mad. I just sound mad. I'm not mad. I just sound mad because I'm tired. So just send it tomorrow morning. It's not a big deal. It's totally fine. So that's one of the things, is just recognizing my own energy levels. And then the other thing that I try to do as much as possible is try to remember that, have you ever heard that phrase before, everybody is fighting a battle that you know nothing about? Just try to assume that whatever it is that this person is coming at you with, it probably has nothing to do with you, and maybe just give them a little bit of extra grace and don't take it personally. Take a deep breath, let it flow through you, and just, okay, whatever's going on with you, what is it that needs to happen in this situation? Try not to meet whatever if they're frustrated or angry or snippy or whatever, maybe that's not really about me. What is it that needs to be happening in this situation next? And where can I take it to a more positive place?
Yeah. Which is hard sometimes when you've got something so top of mind and then someone doesn't give you the response or that you want. And it is hard sometimes to remember that this probably has nothing to do with you. And that's not even a civility thing. That civility is a whole separate category on that, but that is also a thing that at least I struggle with learning over time. And with that, we mentioned it a minute ago about civil behavior and different people in seniority, but what role do you think that leaders and HR in particular should play in modeling that type of behavior?
Right. So I think leaders, I'll start with leaders, because you have to walk the walk if you are a leader, because employees will look to you for the behaviors. And so you start with leaders being respectful, saying please and thank you, acknowledging good work. Those are the behaviors that leaders have to start with. The other thing that's super, super important for leaders is to address incivility in the moment. If someone is not being civil in a discussion, it is so important for the leader to call it out, because if the leader does not, it's like giving permission for it to continue. It's telling the employees that this behavior is okay and that you can do it. If a leader addresses it in the moment, it will stop that action from occurring, and it will let all the other employees know that if they do that, there will be consequences. So I think it's really important for leaders to address it in the moment. And then the final thing is, this is where you bring in HR, is report it. If it is a harassing comment, report it and engage HR, because HR will then now engage in those discussions with them, let them know what the expectations are, but then also document it so that if it happens again, then we're in the neighborhood of involving a corrective action for the employee. So I think there are some important steps. Those are important steps that leaders can take if there is uncivil behavior that they're witnessing.
Yeah. So I just want to say thank you both for giving us so much to think about as we kind of wrap up this roundtable discussion. What is one other small but powerful habit that each of our listeners could adopt immediately to boost civility in their workplaces? I'll start with you, Katharine.
I think as much as possible, if workplaces can get a little bit better at making it more normal, make a norm of talking about how you are doing, making it normal to talk about, wow, that's not an okay thing for me, and that it's okay for it to be different for different people, right? And so if you can develop some language about that, just have this is, oh, that's a red light, green light, yellow light. That's a yellow light word for me. And you don't have to talk about why. You don't have to go into your childhood trauma and why that is the case. That's just a yellow light word for me. And then we don't have to go into it any further. But if you can have just some norm setting for your team around that and make it just a little bit easier to have a conversation around it, I think that just makes it a lot easier for everybody to communicate with each other around it. And it takes a lot of is this a normal thing or not for you to be upset about? It doesn't have to be. It just has to be not okay for you. And then that's the end of the discussion.
Yeah, I like that. Just here's our terms of engagement. I think that's a very practical, simple, and smart way to deal with it. Jelahn, what are your thoughts?
Just a couple for the remote workforce and one for those who are in person. For the remote workforce, I would say turn on your cameras. I will tell you, it is a lot easier to be civil to someone when you have to look them in the eye. And conversely, it's a lot easier to be rude when you don't have to look them in the eye. And so I think turning on your cameras can really be important. And for those who can't turn on their cameras or who are in person, I would just say, listen, saying thank you, showing appreciation goes a long way for employees. It lets them know they're on the right track, and it can encourage them to speak up in the future if you just show appreciation. So those are just two quick things I think that we can do as leaders to encourage a healthier culture in the workforce.
Excellent.
Thank you both so much for being here, for sharing wisdom, insights, and helping, as you were saying, putting us on the right path. And it really is helpful to be thinking about civility and treating people in the right way. It's thought-provoking. And thank you also to our listeners and our GWIT community and our sponsor, Corporate Compliance Insights. We love hearing your ideas for future episodes, and please stay tuned for more conversations. And as a last thought, remember, it's Smokey the Bear, we can all help with civility, no matter what level, your seniority or other thing you're at, and just be conscious of it, because every conversation counts and everything that we all do matters in our workplaces. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.